I used to have two aunts. They're passed away now. One was named Aunt Bun. One was named Aunt Juby. They called her Jubes. And I used to enjoy listening to them talk because they were cantankerous. And they were characters and they were ornery. But the one thing I remember is Aunt Bun would get to planning and tell them what she was going to do. She would say, I'm going to go do this, and then I'm going to go do this. And things we might stick in there from our own life is, I'm going to start exercising. I'm going to start eating right. I'm going to go back to school. And Aunt Juby would listen to her. And then Aunt Juby would look over at Aunt Bun, and it would crack me up. And she'd say, Bun, you ain't going to do nothing. I'm going to finish Ecclesiastes. I'm going to go fast because we're going to wrap it up. Next week, Jonathan's speaking, and then the following week, after our revival week in Heard Abundant Life, we're going to start a new series called The Lies I Learned at Home. And it'll be fun. I promise. My name is Jeff, A New Life in Christ, past and current struggles, sins of self-protection, anxiety. My sins of self-protection led to cynicism. And so all of a sudden, I could be a pretty negative person. I was talking to a friend today. We're kicking around the idea of starting a podcast, and he's a good friend of mine, and he's really positive, and I'm always the really negative one. The book of Ecclesiastes is probably my favorite book, definitely, in the Old Testament. It has to do with this life here and now, and I entitled it, How to Enjoy Your Life. Now, we have this posted on YouTube now, so you can catch up. So I'm not going to do a real long review, but basically, it's not about heaven. It's not about the afterlife. It's the idea, can you enjoy your life right now? Does God intend for you to enjoy your life? And the premise of the book is it's a gift. There's three things that we talk about, God, man, and life, that make up the book and the relationships. So these are the principles. And if you get these right, I think you can have a life you enjoy here under the sun. Life limits man. We've gone over that. You're going to die. You can only go so many places. You know, my whole life I wished I was 6 foot and I could dunk. I could pray and I could do devotions and I could go to Regen, but this guy was never going to dunk. Life is limiting. I got news for you. If your parents told you you could be anything you want to be, they lied. You're only so smart, and you can't change that a lot. You can change your emotional EQ, but you can't change your IQ. You say, man, that's so depressing, it's so limiting. But he said this, it's a gift, enjoy it. You can sit around whining about it, or you can get on with enjoying it. The next thing was God designed life. And this is good and bad, meaning things I enjoy. I like those things, but then God's designed my life with a lot of things that are very painful. I think why I get more cynical is, to be honest, I deal with so much counseling. People don't come into counseling when everything is great. They come into counseling when things are at the lowest. And so, the point is this, God has designed your life, but your life brings glory to God. And I'm not going to revisit this whole thing, but not necessarily where you're going to see it in this life. In fact, I would say, and I tell people this all the time in counseling, if you're looking for it all to make sense now, you're looking for something that's only going to happen in the afterlife. Now, you can play games with yourself to tell you, this is why this happened. This bad thing happened and good came out of it. But you don't really get the full picture until later. We're on the last one, and it was God reveals himself to man. And then this is the verse everyone knows in Ecclesiastes. It's the only verse everyone knows. Okay? And they think it's the theme of the book, but it's not. And I'll get to it in a second. But basically, God reveals himself to man. And man is supposed to fear God and keep his commandments. So I'm going to share a big idea quickly. And this one's a tough one. But I really think it's a key to the book. And there's a lot of themes in here. And I'm not going through the whole book verse by verse. But the big idea is talk is cheap in the book of Ecclesiastes. So what is the way God reveals himself to man? Through his word, through nature, and common grace, or things we observe, things we learn from other people. You could be meeting in your group tonight. You could be meeting your step group tonight. You could be brand new here tonight. Groundwork tonight. And basically, the Word of God could be revealing God to you. Somebody could say something they've observed, you've learned God reveals himself. Nature, God's screaming at you that he's there. So this is the verse everyone knows. Now here's what the theme of Ecclesiastes is not, that you usually hear taught in a Western mindset. In fact, most pastors I know teach it this way. Life sucks. And you're supposed to fear God and keep his commandments. They share it from the point of view that Solomon got old, tried everything in life, it was miserable, he's depressed, and then at the end, the theme of the book is fear God and keep his commandments. That is the conclusion he's making in the book. It's not the theme of the book, because over and over again, he tells you this life is vanity, but that means short duration without substance, but you're supposed to enjoy it. That's the theme of the book. Okay? But this is interesting, two things. So I'll teach on one, and then I'm just going to kind of wrap this up with something personal from me about this. But here, fear God and keep his commandments. So the whole Bible's full of ways to fear God, but I'm going to stick, and this is a principle of Bible study, with one time Solomon mentions it in the book of Ecclesiastes. And it's in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. I know sometimes I say hard things up here, and so I want to tell you, this is something I feel like I need to say right now. I do love you. Part of the reason I got into counseling, got the education in counseling, is I would get frustrated with so many sermons that were always encouraging to people, and people need encouragement. But they would never say the hard thing that would really get someone past something. I remember I've shared this story before. I'll just share it again. I was executive pastor at church, went through a divorce, lost my job when I remarried. I'm still at the church hanging around. A pastor who was much older than me took me out to eat at a restaurant called Steak and Shake in Springfield, Missouri. And I'm sitting across the table from him. And he said, "You like Steak and Shake?" I always thought the burgers were kind of small and it was overpriced. Anyway, but here we go. I'm not dissing on that. He sat across the table from me and he goes, "Well, you do this, you do this, you do this. I'm trying to get my life back." And he says, "And then you'll go back to your church, be restored, and everything will be fine." I remember looking across the table and I just said, "I don't think that's going to happen." And he just looked at me and said, "Then what are you doing there?" Ouch. I thought we were just having dinner. If you want to get better through region, you're going to have to hear some hard things, right? Okay. So here we go. Here's one. Here's what he says. Walk prudently when you go to the house of God. That's the temple in the Old Testament, Solomon's temple, actually. And draw near to hear rather than give the sacrifice of fools. For they do not know that they do evil. What is the sacrifice of a fool? You make it with your mouth. Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven, and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. He's saying, when you approach the temple, don't make a sacrifice of a fool there. What is the sacrifice? It has something to do with, get this, running our mouth. Okay? He says, ready to hear. So I'll just say this. Hearing isn't always listening. I have grandchildren. 10 going on 11, 7, 1.5, and about 8 months now. Now, the ones that are older, they can be hearing me without listening to me. I know that because when I really get on them, are you listening? And they will repeat back what I said, especially the 10-year-old, in my voice imitating me as well. Okay? Don't ever let them hear your voice message where you work. You know, there's no end to them imitating. This is Jeff Cox at Abundant Life. Psh. Anyway, here's the point. They're hearing me, but they're not what? Listening. And what he's saying here is, are you listening to God? James says this, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to what? Wrath. In counseling, I'll be nerdy for a second. When they're talking, which they need to process, at times we'll say they're not ready to take more what? Information. A lot of times the reason we talk is we feel in control. When we're out of control, it's a way to be in control. Control the conversation, control the narrative, control what we say. Ecclesiastes 5:4-5, it says this, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Ouch. If we would just apply this to our life, we would make fewer promises. I mean, of spiritual nature. But we would keep the promises we make. I was meeting with the leaders of Regen the other day. So here's the tough part. I got to say this. There's no shame here. If people quit Regen and start over again, I've worked in counseling for a long time, specifically with addiction. There's lots of relapses of addiction. You have to start over again. This is not a shame thing, but I will say this. We were talking with the leaders the other day. How lenient as leaders in Regen should we be with people stay, they quit, they don't do this, things like this. I just told the leaders the other day, we really don't get to decide. God decides the promises we make to him and how serious he's going to take it. If you vow to do something, do it. That's the way to enjoy your life. Usually we're vowing, here's the deal, good things. I don't vow. I'm going to vow to throw my life away and become addicted to something that will ruin me and all my relationships. Promise. I don't do that. Usually our vows are things that I think are beneficial to our life and our spiritual life. We just vow and we never what? Do them. So he's going through here and he says, better not to vow than to vow and not pay. In Ecclesiastes 1:6-7, do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there is also vanity. But what? Fear God. It's so simple. It's the whole book of Proverbs. How can I enjoy my life more? Be more serious with what you're going to promise to God you're going to do. And do what you say. I'm going to start Regen. Finish Regen. I'm going to enter into community with people to live in that life. Then be faithful to the community. It's not about perfection. It's not about not messing up. And if it's relapse, which is chemical dependency that you might be here for, and I'm not talking like pot, I'm talking fentanyl, I'm talking alcohol, I'm talking highly addictive things here. Are you saying when I fall off the wagon that it's over, I didn't keep my vow? No, it just means this. Keep starting over and over again, working through the relapses until you finish. There's no shame that you don't finish the first time. It's the reality. I've said it before. There's some people come by, I just trusted in Jesus and I was over my addiction. We love you, but we also hate you. Because for most of us, for most of the human beings on the earth that are honest, it's a lot of hard work. Fair enough? All right. Talk is cheap. Keep your promises. I'll finish with this with Ecclesiastes. I used to carry out groceries at a grocery store. I worked my way through college. That's kind of a lie because my dad was paying for my college anyway, but it was his way to keep me working so I wasn't a bum. There's only two things I really cared about when I was working at a grocery store. If she was pretty, I wanted to carry her groceries out. I was in college, and I used to get in trouble for that. There'd be somebody over here and their groceries are, up. Lady over here is attracted. She has a piece of gum. Hey, can I carry that out? That's not an exaggeration. You'd get in trouble for that. The only other thing that we cared about was catching shoplifters because it was kind of a boring job. We didn't have anything else to do. And you tried to catch them over $100 worth of something because then the police would get called and it was kind of fun. We were in college. Why didn't a grocery store is worth over $100? Nope. Cigarettes back then, the whole cartons. Well, you got to put them somewhere and they stick them there and you try to catch them. I used to think this, though. If somebody was walking down the produce aisle and they just reached over and took a grape and ate it, that's shoplifting. What fun is that? How do you get to prove it anyway? It's already down their mouth. He says it's a stupid story. Yeah, but I used to think this. Is stealing a sin, yes or no? Yeah. So those people stole, yes or no? Is God holy, yes or no? Yeah. Did God damn them to hell for all eternity for stealing a grape? So here's the deal. Here comes the cynicism. So I'm going to give you the Bible. Because you see at the end there, fear God and keep his commandments. And don't you think of the negative ones. If you grew up in church, I grew up in a good fundamentalist Baptist church. I learned it later in life. Some of them were saved. That's a being shot. Here we go. The reality is this. My whole life I spent, keep a commandment. That's bad. Don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, don't do these things. And then I grew up. So I give you the narrative real quick. What's the commandment to keep? What is the meta-narrative of the Bible? So Jesus said this. I'll summarize the Torah for you and the entire Old Testament. What's the greatest commandment? Here he comes. Love the Lord God, thy heart with all thy mind, soul, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. Oh, wait, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then you get to John, and John's different. And at the end of his life, he says this, hey, I want you to love, but not your neighbor as yourself anymore, because there's a better example. I want you to love with the new commandment, love as I've loved. The reason God became man is because it's unbelievably difficult to imagine what this would look like to love. So Jesus lived 3.5 years in ministry, 33.5 years on life, 3.5 years in ministry, recorded it so we'd know what exactly it means to love. And here's what he says. All men know you're my disciples because you're holy? Nope. Because you're praying? Nope. Because you're faithful? Nope. He said, all men will know you're my disciples because you have what? Love for one another. Skip over to Romans. At the end, he says, I want you to love without hypocrisy. Skip over to the church of Corinth, and he said, now abide in three things, faith, hope, and love. I want to tell you the greatest one, so you'll never miss it, is love. That love chapter in Corinthians, that's every wedding. I hope people love that way, but it's about how we love each other. He gets to the book of Galatians, and he says, there's legalistic people, but I want to tell you this. You will fulfill the law if you love your neighbor as yourself. He repeats that again. He gets to the book of Ecclesiastes, says, what is the depth and the breadth and the height and all these things so you can know love. He gets to the book of Colossians, and he writes this, Paul, and he says, it is the bond of your perfection. Peter says this, you're going to add to your faith, you're going to have knowledge and virtue and all these things, and he gets to the end. But here's the very end, brotherly kindness, and he tops it off and he says, it is charity at the end. And Jesus' best friend, who lived longer than all the other apostles, he saw him die, he saw him martyred, and it's John at the end of his life. He's writing these epistles before he gets to Revelation where all the monsters come, and he says this. 1 John chapter 4, 7, 8. Beloved, let us love one another. For love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. Let that sink in. God is what? So whatever your theology is, here's the reality. It begins with this. God is love. So you get in the book of Ecclesiastes. How will I enjoy my life? This is the commandment. This is the meta-narrative. This is the apex. This is the theme of the Bible. Well, God is holy. Yes, you're separate from things on this earth because they impede your ability to love. You will be known by that. If you don't get anything out of Regen, and I put this up here at the very end, the reason you want to get well, the reason you want to be sober, the reason you want to be in right relationships, the reason why you want to kick the habit, the reason why you want to get over the pride, the reason you want to stop doing the people-pleasing, the reason why you want to get past the control belief, the reason you want to get past the perfectionism, the reason you want to get past all the stuff we come for is that you will love the family of God well. You will love your family of origin well as much as you can. You will love the unreached well. You will love the least of these well. And eventually you will love your enemies well. And in doing that, you love God well. It is why you were created. There is no enjoying this life if it's counterintuitive to that. I can tell you this, I read stuff, I read the journal stuff, all the stuff I teach at Calvary University. I'm teaching this counseling stuff. Sent out a thing by a therapist the other day to rank the basic things they wish people would know. And I just look on that stuff every once in a while. See what the research says. Number one on the list, people want to be loved and love. Whenever I teach this, I people, well, you know, he's holy. Well, you know, you can't do this. You know, the world's talking about love and they don't have any standards. And I'm like, blah, 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 blah. You have to intentionally miss it if you read the Bible and you don't see it's about that. And you will miss who you are if you don't know this. You were created to experience, feel, receive, and give love. And it is only through God and Jesus Christ that you're going to be able to accomplish that. I don't want you to view God as, you did this, don't say this, bad, get over that habit, you're a failure. He is the Father crying out for you to become what he intended for you to become, and that is a great lover.